Welcome back, you resident nerds. My name is Nikita, your comic authority.
I'm Gino. This is the first time you're seeing us on video, I'm assuming.
Yep, and he's our local weeb, but we'll give him a pass this time. But with us today, we've got a special guest you probably see on the screen. This is comic book writer Jason Douglas. If you want to introduce yourself, man.
Hi, guys. Thank you very much for having me on. It's my pleasure to be here. As you said, my name is Jason Douglas, and I wrote a comic book.
Woo!
Yes. This is a lifelong fanboy dream of mine. And I waited a little bit longer. You can tell, sometimes these internet cameras can be flattering, sometimes not, but you can probably tell that I have somewhere between 2 and 14 decades on you guys, which means I waited a little bit longer to pursue that dream, considering how long I've been a fan of comic books. But here I am, and I've put my first one into the world, and it got published by SourcePoint Press, and I'm super excited to talk about it today with you guys.
There we go. Yeah. Actually, Jason reached out to us, and we've looked into the story. It's called Parallel by SourcePoint Press, as he noted earlier. Really interesting read. We really enjoyed it. And so we're glad you're here to interview with us real quick. We have couple questions. Do you want to give a base explanation of what Parallel is about?
Sure, absolutely. So you can kind of, oh my God, I can't believe I'm going to do this off the bat, but it kind of has two, oh my God, forgive me, parallel ways to look at the book, right?
Oh, he said it.
I know.
Credits,
I'm so sorry. even apologizing, even prefacing it and apologizing like 3 times before I said it, I still felt filthy when it came out of my mouth, boys. This is not a good way to begin, but
we'll take it.
I'm a comic book fan, so what you have on the surface is a pretty hardcore sci-fi tale with a lot of darkness and a lot of twists and turns, and a pretty solid, especially in the second half, a crescendo into madness on the one hand and some pretty intense situations and choices that our main character Landon's got to make on the other hand. But underneath, it's really a story that's thematically about the existential anxiety that a lot of us feel at different points in our lives, right? Call it the quarter life crisis, call it the midlife crisis, call it that stagnation that you get when you allow your dreams to be deferred for, in Landon's case, our main character, he defers his dreams of pursuing music, like in his very early 20s. And he does that thing that happens to so many of us. And you blink your eyes and you wake up and it's somewhere between 5 and 8 years later and you're pushing 30. And suddenly that time is gone. And you're like, well, what happened? Why am I still in that job that I took very temporarily to pay the next bill? Why am I still in that relationship that was never that great to begin with, but it's easier than, the alternative? And Landon finds himself in that situation. And so on that level, it's a very relatable story because so many of us deal with that at different points in our lives of deferring dreams, and then the kind of existential dread, and maybe it manifests as depression or stagnation or anxiety or however it turns out for you. And then time just keeps on going, right? Now, where it gets a lot of fun and where the darkness really comes in, if that's not dark enough, is that Landon's kind of manifestation of dealing with this pretty universal thing that most of us go through is he starts to hear voices and see visions of a different version of him that is offering him the second chance that so many of us don't get. And as tempting and seductive as what he has shown and what he experiences is, it's really, really this other version of Landon, the other Landon, is offering something, and the cost is definitely not beneficial mentally, much less physically, to the real Landon in the here and now.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. Yeah. I mean, that alone already, you make it sound very enticing and very interesting. And having read it ourselves,
I was going to say, I think you kind of summed up my general feelings in regards to that kind of darkness feeling. Definitely some very dark tones.
And complex questions too, like questions about, it's mentioned in the story, but like questions about like fate and destiny and where that aligns, and whether you let that dictate your life. And I found it really interesting, especially comparing it to, you then add on to the fact, like a metaphysical sense, parallel universes. And so
as a 20 something, in regards to your comment about the universality of existential dread, I definitely can agree with that, especially in regards to like a quarter life crisis potentially, right?
Yeah.
Coming at the end of my own college experience, I could definitely feel like the kind of tugs and pulls of that emotional weight that Landon was kind of going throughout the story.
And so, I mean, did you have anything to comment on
well,
that?
there's like this, and I've talked about this before, but the thing that really strikes me, and the thing that I've gotten a decent amount of feedback about on the book, is it's kind of ironic because, you know, like I said, it manifests for different people in different ways, right? Like when it hits you and how it hits you, yet it tends to be pretty universal. And that's the irony, right? When you feel in your rut, when you have the depression or the anxiety or the dread, or however you're kind of, you know, experiencing this very metaphysical or kind of this experience, it's very isolating, right? You're very much on your own, and not only is it isolating, but you feel very isolated. And yet just about everybody you've ever known and will ever meet goes through something similar at their own time and at their own experience. And like this very isolating thing is something that's probably being experienced by the person you're not talking to, or you're not reaching out to, who could totally give you the perspective and the help that you need.
Yeah. Are you aware of Schopenhauer's hedgehog theory? It's very for our listeners at home, in case you're not aware, the hedgehog theory essentially goes that human beings are like hedgehogs that are freezing out in the snow, and so hedgehogs, of course, are going to want to gather together for warmth, to stay warm. But because they have quills, the closer they get to each other, the more that they're hurting each other. And so the idea that human beings have our own intellectual thought and capacity, exposing and want to expose ourselves to other human beings, but knowing that it comes with a potential price of harm, always kind of keeps us in this really weird drive of meshing together yet staying apart.
Yeah.
So now, boys, before this gets too heavy and too philosophical,
yes,
we are nerds, and what I would like to point out, that the only reason that I know anything about Schopenhauer is not because of some deep intellectual or university-based pursuit, but because he is mentioned in Monty Python's Philosopher's Song, and then that led me to read stuff beyond that.
Oh I personally know about Schopenhauer. I'm a philosophy major, so that's part
there
one.
You go.
But part two, that would be, I originally came into the concept from Evangelion, being my main focus on.
Yeah, because you're the local weeb.
Yeah, I am our local weeb. But Evangelion deals with similar themes in regards to human beings having this constant struggle with each other. So I'm glad you've gotten. I can definitely understand it in your work, especially having this conversation so far.
Cool.
Awesome. Quick questions I just want to ask you. I guess first about being a comic book writer, because I don't want to get too into the story just in case someone wants to read it. So you have a chance to read it now before we get to the end of the episode. Pause the episode, read it, and then we'll discuss that. We don't spoil anything. But just as a comic book writer coming out, releasing your first title published project, which is huge. That's absolutely huge. That's something, I mean, you just mentioned you did it later on in your life, and that shows, you can do this. You can strive for this whenever you want. You don't have to be our age at 20 trying to figure it all out if you don't have it figured out yet. And so some things I first of all, what I wanted to ask you is, when did you get into writing itself, and why did you get into writing?
So my story, like the comic book publishing origin story, is very, very atypical, not only in how the book was published, but how I got here and got to the point where I wrote it. It's been the dream, right? There's always something in the back of my mind, even when I was a kid. I took a very typical 9-year break from comics, like in my mid-teens and then into my 20s, and then came back into comic shops 9 years later, and redoubled my love of comics and collecting and reading and following certain artists and writers. And it just kind of was on a back burner. It was always there, but never, look, one of the lessons of the book is it's always easier to do nothing than to do something. And time keeps on going no matter what you do or don't do. Yeah. And so time passed, just like for Landon, just like for all of us. And I actually came in a very roundabout way. So my day job is I'm a public school teacher. And by happenstance, when I was still teaching elementary school, there were some budget cuts. And the fifth grade musical that I was helping out with the skits, because I had some theater background when I first started teaching and coming out of college and doing some like local theater and stuff, I was helping out with the skits, and budget got cut, and I was like, oh, we're not gonna be able to do this anymore. And the music teacher said, well, no, you just need to start the first drama club in our district for elementary school. And I was like, okay, I will do that. And we didn't have a budget. So in my little bubble of ignorance, I said, well, I can't afford to buy these kids plays. I can't afford to buy these kids skits. So I guess what you do is you write your own, again, just not it, you just do your own. That's easy, right? So necessity, mother of invention, right? As a cliche. Mm-hmm. And I started writing skits, and I started writing one-act plays, and we would put them on. And then I moved to middle school and did the same thing. And we were, putting on shows, and I was writing a play every summer, a one act, like somewhere between 60 and 80 pages, about an hour's worth of stage time. And a couple of them got published by, put them out there in the world just by happenstance. And one of the big four kind of North American publishers, Hewer, put out a couple of the plays. And, you gotten the catalog that goes to something like, some insane number of 10,000 local theaters and schools and stuff like that. And a couple of my plays have been performed in faraway places like North Dakota and California and Michigan and Saskatchewan. And it's mind blowing. And all this is going on, and I love it. Don't get me wrong, but still years are going by. And the thing that I've always really wanted to do is just still sitting there. And then one summer, a bunch of kind of catalysts happened at one moment, and the circumstances kind of aligned, and the stars aligned, the universe aligned, and I took a summer off from writing a play. And I was like, I'm going to write the comic this summer. I'm going to do it. And again, just that bubble of blissful ignorance. Hey, I can write a play. I can write a comic. Oh man, is it much harder than, it's a completely different animal. It's like, had I known what I know now, then it would totally scared me off, and I would have waited another 20 years. But I took that break that summer, sat down, and wrote the first half of Parallel, because it's a 64-page graphic novel, and I wrote the first 30 pages that summer, kind of in this little bubble of no plans other than it was the time to do it.
Okay.
So I'm not as familiar with comic book writing, only because I'm more of our manga anime expert. And I know it's definitely a different process, especially when you're working with a team. So for instance, like I know you have an artist, correct? What is it like writing prior to? Because I'm assuming you wrote prior to working with the team, correct?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So what's it like in that kind of bubble, I suppose, when it is just you?
Well, it's hard to describe only because I didn't have a frame of reference from the beginning, right? Yeah. Because I'm starting from scratch, because I'm saying I'm doing this without knowing how to do this. It's very much these incremental steps. Even though you're doing it all at once, you're just like, well, I need to find some time. I need to find a place. I need to then understand physically what the script looks like. Because, my irrational confidence was, if I can write something for the stage, how much different could it be? Oh, good Lord. I don't know if you could just see my eyes roll out of my head right there. Yeah. Just how dumb I was a couple of summers ago. And it's like, okay, the same thing that makes comics, in my opinion, the most malleable format for storytelling is what also makes it one of the hardest things to actually write. So what a comic can do just about everything prose can do, and a bunch of things prose can't. A comic can do just about everything film can do, and a bunch of things film can't. And it's like this weird medium kind of meet in the middle thing where it does all these amazing things. You can tell any type of story, right? I mean, I know in the United States, it's been 80 years of superheroes almost nonstop, but it literally can tell any type of story and tell a bunch of stories that it's kind of big cousins on either wing of it can't tell. But because of that, when you sit down to make one, especially from the writer's perspective, it's like a whirly beast animal that is very unruly, because you are not only considering your story, you are considering pacing, not just narratively, but visually as well. We're talking about numbers of panels on a page, panel size, panel shape. Do you want a visual reveal to happen on the facing page, on the flip page, so that the reader's got to wait a second. I mean, it's an amazing stack of things that you're thinking about all at one time. I mean, the entire pacing of the story, down to thematic things, down to dialogue, down to literally having to learn how to write this physical thing that is truly a little bit unlike anything else that you would write. I mean, I had to look online and learn how many times you hit indent, right?
Yeah.
For this type of line, where then you need the colon, where then you need the parentheses that say SFX effect, that say a timestamp versus a bit of narration versus a word balloon versus a thought balloon. I mean, yeah. So that was like all happening at once for those first 32 pages, which literally I'm writing in a bubble, because there is no plan for publication at that point. There is no interaction with an artist at that point. It's the urge. It was the catalyst that came together and said, this is a story I really want to tell. This is a dream I want to finally pursue. And it wasn't until I got about to that 32 page mark, that halfway through the story, that I was like, okay, let's take a breather, see what I have, and what now do you do with it? And that's where I took it somewhere. That's where I got lucky and ran into Source Point Press, and that's where the team comes in. And then the process is, once again, this is kind of what you guys were getting at. Then it changes again, because now you're working with an artist. Now you're working with an editor. Then a letterer is turning your words into pieces of magic on a page, you know, and it became this whole new ball game. And the fanboy in me came out in that second half like you wouldn't believe. Oh my God. It was like, as long as it took, as much blood, sweat, and tears goes into it from all of our perspectives. I mean, small press comics, right? They don't just get made. There isn't an 80-year bit of infrastructure there like a Marvel or DC to just churn out books. No shade being thrown, but it's a lot of work. And yet every single second of it, oh boys, just watching that thing come alive was just a bit of magic, honestly.
How was it? Because you talk about that transition into working with a team. How was it? Was that easy for you? Was there anything difficult? Like, I'm just trying to imagine, almost when you're working with an artist, almost, do you have to kind of give direction, or do they kind of take the rails and you just kind of go from there?
It always depends. And my personal experience was a mix of like I said before, magic and eye-opening and amazing, and the negative things about it are all on me and all completely my fault. Like, so working with Adam Ferris was absolutely brilliant, because if you get hooked up with a good artist, as Adam is, they always make your words better than you could have ever imagined. So like I really planned it. I mean, I loosened up a little bit. Here's the coolest thing about writing the second half. It gets a lot darker in the second half, as you guys know, and those crescendos kind of build, and that was always the plan to an extent. But as soon as I saw what Adam could do, it completely changed how I wrote that second half as well. Like it's darker than maybe it was originally intended, because I saw what Adam could do, right? There's a little bit more ambiguity in that second half, where you're kind of going pretty rapidly, panel to panel, page to page, scene to scene, where you believe that this is all happening in Landon's head. You turn the page and you're like, oh my God, this is totally real. It's happening to him. What's going to happen next? And then you flip again. And a lot of that is due to the ability of what Adam can do and how Adam can draw ambiguity, which sounds really weird coming out of my mouth. Like, I don't even know what that means when I say drawing ambiguity, but the dude can do it.
Yeah. And
so like, that was kind of an amazing experience writing for him to an extent. On the negative aspect, and this is completely on me, this is the first time in my life that I ever worked with an editor. Because like with the playwriting, when you're just putting it on for a couple hundred people in the community, I mean, that's my play. And, if a 10-year-old in the first place comes up to you and says, I don't really like the scene, you say, yeah, you're 10, sit down. No disrespect to 10-year-olds, but like, I'm gonna go with what I wrote here, 10-year-old.
Thanks for the feedback.
Sorry, I get to see little 10-year-old Gino doing that too.
Yeah, I was pretty pretentious back in the day. I'm not gonna lie. It's I think it's where the philosophy major stems from.
I respect your opinion on the artistic integrity of your character, 10-year-old, but we're gonna stick with what I wrote. And then what's funny is like when you publish a play, even with one of these big publishing companies, the reason why they take so few each year is because they don't edit you. They read it word for word. And if it's what they want, they take it and that's done. Yeah. So this was literally the first time in my life where somebody gave me notes and said, you need to change these things. And I got so into my own head about that. And I got so precious about my beautiful artistic creation. And we're talking about my editor is the great Bob Sally, who's a heck of an editor and a heck of a writer himself, like a best-selling writer himself. And he had my first set of notes hit, and I called my my best friend Dougie, who was also acting as my attorney and for my contract and stuff. And I was like, Dougie, get me out of this! I can't believe that he asked me that. He said, oh, this is not, I don't forget this 20-year dream. This is not. Oh, get me out! And he's like, dude, will you just take a minute? And I go back and. All you have to do is read what he actually wrote, and everything that he asked me to change is for the better. I mean, whatever kind of instinctive comic book writer I was, just from a fan standpoint, right? Having just absorbed so much over the years, whatever I had studied structurally to make sure that it worked, there's more that I don't know or didn't know about script writing for a comic book than I did. And here's an experienced human who's literally telling me something basic, like you need another establishing panel, right? Like, like this is a great scene, but like, we don't know where you're at because you didn't do the shot showing the outside of the building.
Yeah.
And my first reaction is, I'm sorry, I'm the artist that how dare you tell me such a, and like, oh my God, get out of your own head, you pretentious so-and-so. And so like, he always made it better every single time. Same with Adam, right? So like, there are scenes where he's like, let me just cut down. I'm going to condense these two panels. Now you're going to have to move the dialogue around or cut this or cut that, but it always worked better to flow. And the collaboration, 100% of the time on this book made it better. So it was a bit magical. And then I'll tell you this really quick. As wonderful it is to like have a page come in and like the page is done and it's, oh my God, I know, I wrote that. I can see it. Where it clicked for me and it turned from something I was doing into like this, oh my God, this is really happening, was when Justin Birch, who is an amazing letterer, I was hinting at something online with him and he took the bait and he's like, do you want to do like a FaceTime call? Do you want to watch me letter a page or two? And I'm like, yes, I do. Yes, I do. Thank you for asking. I'm glad it was your idea, even though I've been hinting at it for like a month now. And I got to watch him. He did a screen share and I'm literally watching him use his program to put these words that I had written long ago at this point, like 2 years ago at that point, and turn them into reality. And it was amazing. And it was such a treat. And I think I actually got into his head because I was so geeking out about not only that he was doing it for my words, but the process itself. Like I was watching a comic book get made, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And he was like very quickly, like lightning fast with this program, like choosing the angle of the tail for the speech bubble. Right? Like he's like 48 degrees for this one and it flew right into the mouth and stuff. And he was just doing it instantly. And I was like, and I was like, you gotta slow down because how do you know? And he's like, and you could tell I completely derailed him because his eyes got really big and he's like, I don't know. He's like a baseball, like swinging or like dude bowling. Like you don't think about it once you're at that point, once you're that good. And I was like, he's like, I don't. And then he started saying, I'm like, I'm so sorry because I think I completely derailed him. I was like, I hope I didn't ruin your career. I'm gonna go now because I totally messed with his head because I was geeking out so much. He's like, oh, you're fine, and he's fine now. But I felt really bad at the time.
That really awkward moment when you ask someone like, hey man, like how do you breathe? Like how do you do
that? You're just and then you're like, I don't want to think about how I breathe. Now I'm never gonna. Oh yeah, then I had that panic kind of thing. I was like, I think I just ruined him as a letterer. He's like the best letterer, and I think I just ruined him. Oh well. We have a good friend of ours who reviews our show and gives us notes.
for every episode that we drop, and he's pretty qualified, I would say, to do that. But I've never gotten to personally meet him, so I'm getting my notes from him from other sources. So in my head, I've got this like rivalry with this man who I'm ready to throw down to, and it's like every time I get notes back, I'm like, all right, fine, I'll do it better next time. Like I'm ready to go. Let's go.
Yeah,
so I could definitely relate to that. I definitely feel you in regards to your editor, the kind of like getting into your head feeling, because I'm like, I'm a pretty good speaker, man. I'm a pretty good podcaster. What are you talking about?
And they give you this one note, and Gino's like, "Oh, fine, okay then."
Dare you tell me anything, even though you're better at it than me and an expert, and I don't know anything.
Yep. Oh my gosh, that's so cool though. Hearing about that process and just seeing like you got to see a comic book being made, and I like for a time there was a moment before I even started this podcast where I was like, I kind of want to try writing a comic book. I feel like every comic nerd has gone through this, where they feel like they have this story and stuff like that. And then as you said, I did the research and I was like, oh, this is a lot. This is a lot more than what I think I have time for, what I think I can do at the moment. And so like the fact that you're able to do that, and as well as watch the process behind the scenes, because what blew my mind was how much of a team it is. It's the letters, the editors, the artists, and you're working with all of them, even separate artist levels. Sometimes people do the lines, sometimes people do the inks and stuff like that. Like it's a whole cog in a machine that you have to make sure everything works together.
That's just the creative first step, right? That's nothing about the actual the publishing it and getting it printed and then soliciting it and getting out in the world and the promotion and even the design of the book, and parts of that still elude me completely understanding the business aspect of it. And it's like this, you're right. It's like this, so many people involved. And then when you think about it, so SourcePoint Press is a monster right now in the indie publishing world. Right. And like their growth over the last 5 years has been exponential. I mean, cutting their teeth on the convention circuit and just being like a champ out there for years. And then going to, I think we're putting out like 10 books a month in previews right now. And like, I mean, just crushing it. And yet the tiniest drop in the bucket compared to say like Marvel and DC or even Image. Yeah. And so like what you deal with is, so like, okay, so Parallel is like 64-page one-shot graphic novel, right? And like a lot of bang for your buck. I mean, it's only $7. And you know, something I really pride myself on this, I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent, is like me personally as a comic fan, I've always really appreciated rereadability. Right. And that was something that, talk about like all the things that are on your mind when you're even from typing word one. I wanted there to be enough questions, enough ambiguity, enough reader ownership and choice that when you get to the end, if you guys have been to the end, I mean, you know, that last big, you know, kind of splash page at the end, you can interpret that maybe more than one way. And, you know, one of my favorite bits of feedback has been, you know, people saying like, I immediately went back and read it and found the clues and changed my mind about this scene or that scene, or what was really happening or not happening, or what Landon did or didn't do. And I love that. So you get a lot of bang for your buck. But my point is this: when you're buying indie comics, which even though like per capita is this tiny little sliver of the market, it also still makes up most of the comics out there, right? There are more comics, you know, whether they be web based or independently published or small press publishing, like it's still the most books. And like your $7 when you buy an indie comic, literally, and I mean literally, puts clothes on people's back and food on the tables and keeps people in jobs, right? Again, no shade at the bigger companies, right? But like I said, I think I said this is the third time I said it, 80 years of infrastructure is a different ballgame than the blood, sweat, and tears to produce something from an artist's heart and mind, and then a family, which is literally what SourcePoint Press is, putting it together, putting it out in the world. And when you sell a handful of copies, somebody gets to have a job next month. So that was like, and that's, you know what, that's the other big eye-opening experience of this, right? The appreciation for the work on the effort that goes in on the creative side, on the business side. And as frustrating as it could be at times, how long this process can be, it gives you time to ruminate and understand the effort that goes into it, and give you a whole level of appreciation for the passion behind indie comics.
Dang. That's also because I'm curious, was there ever an inspiration because I'm a huge advocate of indie comics. I love indie comics, and I do think, people are when they think about comic books, they only think superheroes, because of Marvel and DC, which I get, I understand, but there are just such an array of stories. And so what was there an inspiration for you that made you want to think I don't want to write a superhero comic, I want to write something, another genre, another theme, something different out there? Have there been any indie comics that have inspired you specifically to do that? Or
well, I mean, I don't know if there was any the inspiration for this story is threefold, and none of the three of those things on their own were enough to motivate me to get off my butt and pursue this dream, right? Like I said before, or easier to do nothing than to do something, right? Yeah. Time just keeps on going. So you have this dream of wanting to make something, and that just sat on the back burner, and no matter what happened, right? Decades went by, nothing happened. The idea for the sci-fi parallel alternate Landon or alternate you offering you a second chance was kind of brainstormed. Me and my buddy Pete, who I went to college with, and we went to teacher school together, kind of came up with that idea in a very raw way. But it was actually the third thing that was the catalyst, and that was quite literally former students of mine. Okay, people who are actually Landon's age now, right? Because I've been doing this long enough where they're pushing 30, and some of these kids that I was still in contact with literally living that same situation that Landon finds himself in. Of that, I had all these hopes and dreams at 18 to 21, and I took this job because I had to pay the rent, right? I set my dream aside because when you're 22, the future is forever, and you always have time to come back to your dream. And those same kids, I'm talking to them 5 to 8 years later, and they're like, what happened? Why am I not? I'm thinking of one of my former students in particular. Why am I not in Chicago at that dance studio, right? Why am I not in New York pursuing X, Y, and Z? Why am I still here working, 9 to 5? Again, no shade to that, but I had this dream. I looked away, and now I'm almost 30, and I don't know that that door's open anymore. And those three things just came together at once, and I was like, that's the story I want to tell. That's a story I wanted to tell. What I mentioned earlier about comics being that very, very malleable medium, meaning they can accept any kind of story. This happened to be the one that was closest to my heart, and the one that, my life combined with my former students' life, combined with my love of all kinds of stories, whether they be sci-fi, whether they be superhero, it doesn't really matter. If it's well told, I'm going to eat it up. Those came together, and that's what produced this story. Now, having said that, the project that I've got kind of waiting to get word back on from SourcePoint right now, even though it's got some really heavy underlying themes again about identity and about you being you, and then on its surface about race and gender, it is a superhero story. It is a story about a post-World War II 15-year-old girl who's got powers manifested because her dad died in World War II at 12 years old. She's been hiding it because the world doesn't have that. And she has the ability at 15 to kind of the strength and the speed of 10 full-grown men, and could probably keep their family afloat, but has to keep it hidden because that whole identity thing. And so I'm definitely not scared of that kind of story, but luckily I'm working in a medium that will accept that kind of story.
Yeah. Wow, that's okay, cool. So a little project reveal potentially. Mm-hmm. That's so cool. All right, so we're now, I guess we're kind of into the point where we're asking about the book. I think it's at this point, if you haven't read the book, spoiler warning, sorry to tell you. But so I'm curious, were Landon and his wife based on anyone in real life by any chance? Because their problems do feel very, I feel like it's almost referenceable in a way.
Definitely on the point.
Yeah,
a toxic relationship. I will say.
Yes, very toxic.
Right. So I have to be very careful because too many people and it's usually people like who know me, or at least know me tangentially, are like, so is that you and your wife? And I have to very quickly say, absolutely not, because I want to stay married. And like, if you've read the book, you know that Claire and Landon have got some friction there, and got some tension, and there's if I even boys, even if it was, I couldn't tell you that it's not, but I couldn't, because I want to live here tomorroh.
Yeah.
So,
you like your library, you don't want to lose that nice Zoom background.
I do. I wouldn't have any place to put my books. And you should see the comics in the basement. It's even more than this. So yeah, I can't. No, it's nobody in particular. It's everybody, right? I mean, like Landon is very much all of us. Landon is me. Landon is you. Claire is way too much me. I mean, that's something that I think I wrote her very adversarial in the first half. And I don't know how you guys felt about this, but I have a lot of sympathy for her in the second half of that book. Because I mean, what Landon's putting her through, I actually have a lot of sympathy for that character who feels very toxic in that first half. I admit that. And I have some sympathy for her in the second half. And then I think one of the big things that I've admitted, since it came out, and like re-looking at it and kind of re-examining it as a whole piece, is like, and most writers do this. I think there's a little bit of me in all of those characters. I will tell you this. Here's a nice little bit of like inside baseball. Another thing that I really respect about writers of good stories, comic books and otherwise, is when you have to do a minimum of suspension of disbelief, even for the wildest things, because everything else in there is so grounded and so real. So like I made a pretty concerted effort to make everything except for the theoretical other you coming in and making, offering Landon this other choice, and the physical manifestation of this other him, and the physical interaction and the danger that he's in and stuff like that. So I did a lot of research and did a lot of referencing, and the police officer, right? The detective, the psychologist, the doctor, these were all people who every single line of their dialogue, when it comes into like a professional standpoint, those were all, I went to people in my life and people that I knew and was like, okay, so what do you say? I went to my cousin who's a doctor. What do you say when this happens? Right. What would she then be saying here? So like as realistic as possible, all that dialogue is fact checked and whatever. Like anytime there's a medication effort, like that's the real thing that would be prescribed at that moment. Right. I wanted especially the mental health aspects of it to be as true to life as possible, because honestly, guys, if there is one thing that I want people, somebody reads this book and has a good time and enjoys it and whatever, fantastic, hooray, right? But if there's literally one human being who reads this and goes, oh yeah, I relate to that, I don't feel as alone, I've got an option to go talk to somebody who wasn't going to do that before, that's the greatest victory that I could think of, right? I wanted that mental health aspect of this, the fact that Landon does get help, even though it works and doesn't work at various points, to be accessible, to be real, to be truthful, to be sympathetic. You'll notice that like she's really the one person who, at no point is saying like, I'm not here to devalue what you are experiencing. Right? If everybody in your life is thinking that you're crazy and that's in your head, even if you're one of those people, that is not my job. My job is to listen to you and for us to work through whatever it is that you're going through. So I made sure that every single thing in this was as true and human and real as possible, so that you could just then let go and go, oh, how wild that there's this confrontation, again, not giving too much away, at the top of the stairs with this other version of me who's telling me to make a pretty hairy choice about my physical well-being, just because I want to get back to this alternate reality that's pretty tempting and seductive for me.
I really like that, because I do want to quickly comment. The two things. First, the very first, I say scene, but more like the very first page where or not the very first page, but the page where after he had just jumped in front of the car and doctors, EMTs are working on him in the ambulance, trying to get him into the hospital room. A lot of that dialogue, I thought, wow, this is almost exactly how I've heard off, I feel like, doctor shows or things like that. Like it made me question first. I was like, did he research this? I'm curious.
That is a phone conversation with my cousin in Boston. And like, here's the situation. Good Dr. Cousin. What is being said here? What is the medication? What would because it was funny because she was only a year out. She's a little bit younger than me. And she was like only a year or two out from when she was doing her rotation in emergency medicine and doing ride-alongs with the paramedics. So, I mean, it was like line for line for line in the emergency room. The doctor is kind of based on her, and then like what those paramedics were saying to Landon and to each other on that ride. Oh yeah. Well, very researched and very much as true to life as could be, because I got it straight from that, straight from this. Same with the questions the detective asks. Same with the way that the psychiatrist is interacting with Landon. Like, those are all things where I talked to people and said, what would they say in this point? Or if I already wrote it, like, what do you think about this? What do I need to change? From the medication to the verbiage to all of it. Absolutely.
Dang. Yeah. Cause the other thing was with the psychiatrist, I love the fact that she never really flat out tells Landon, like, you're imagining all this. She never states no to him, that it's like, right. Okay, this is what you're thinking. Why are you thinking it instead? I just love the way she phrased her questions. And even at one point where she had flat out said, like, I'm not here, as you said earlier, I'm not here to discredit what you're saying. I'm here to be the one person that just listens to you.
Right. Also, the motivation of like, or that kind of motivating factor of just keep telling him, like, you're gonna get through this, like, you're gonna be okay. Like that also felt reassuring to me in regards to how I would say like psychiatrists are supposed to act and are supposed to work in the workplace.
Yeah.
So excellent job.
Thank you. Honestly.
I had a quick question in regards to you kind of mentioned this earlier before we started the interview officially on the behind the scenes. I was very curious in regards to the geometry coming back constantly as a theme throughout the book. I know you mentioned earlier that you definitely had a background in terms of geometry, but I'm just curious how it fits into the narrative of your story, and like, were there possible alternatives, or were you always shooting for that as like a kind of reaching metaphor for parallel?
It was one of the first things I was sure of in my brain. I think, like I mentioned before, that I was doing such a juggling act as I was typing that first page, right? As I was sitting down that first session to write some stuff of the story and the themes and the pacing and the physicality of the book all at once, not to mention, like I said before, just like, how do you physically write a comic script versus other things I had written, that I think, while it is a narrative device, while it does obviously work for the story, the parallel lines, the geometry, the point, the explosions, and they're all based on things that, write what you know, right? The most famous writing quote. Well, I taught fourth grade math for 11 years. And I taught lines and points and parallel lines and stuff like that. So there's that. But also, I think it was almost, crutch is the wrong word, because it's going to be used that's negative. But like, it helped me, right? To have, like, I was thinking of this story physically as well as like viscerally. Okay. And so there's a bunch of structural, God, again, tricks is the wrong word because it sounds so negative and so cheap, but like to be able to use the geometric shapes as a framing device at like 2.5 different points in the book. In the first half, I don't even know if I've ever talked about this in an interview before, but in the first half, one of my favorite early things where I was kind of very proud of myself for pacing things a certain way was like when you get the Landon and Claire backstory, right? When you go to that flashback and after they kind of meet cute, and there's that hilarious thing in the alleyway where the taser is used, with that great Adam Ferris panel there. When you see their relationship start to slowly drift apart, those patterns are very repetitive, right? It kind of repeats the same page for several pages in a row because not only symbolizing routine, right? And how time will just drift and your life is just, you're aging, but nothing changes. And like the panel's the same, but there's these slight differences in them. You can see them in their bed. They're an inch apart one year, and then they're 2 inches apart the next year, and they're slowly drifting. And the way they look at each other or don't look at each other in the car, and like that repetitive, again, a very kind of mathematical almost equation to that. I definitely latched onto that and said, well, here's a kind of a cool way to help tell this story.
Yeah, no, that montage where they go throughout the years and the general repetitiveness, like just looking for those little differences, I have to hand it to Adam. It was exceptional. I had a really good time looking for them, and it worked so well in terms of the narrative storytelling.
Hey, can I also ask, whose idea was it with I call it the in-between space, but basically when Landon's arguing with himself, the other version of himself, and it's just, a blank white page and their dialogue. I really like that. Was that your idea or was it Adam's?
Yeah, that was mine.
Okay.
That was mine. The blackouts and the whiteouts, again, like just there was trick's the wrong word, but there were like these ideas. I knew that even from the beginning, I knew that I didn't know enough about art to make the decisions that then I learned that Adam was going to help me make, right? Mm. But I knew there were a bunch of things that I thought would just look really, really cool, and not only look really cool, but kind of be creative and kind of be clever and kind of help move the story forward and make you focus on one thing or not focus on another, or I don't know, like a lot of those things came together. And I was just inspired at different points to just try these things where I knew I couldn't draw the panel myself. So like it was my attempt at some kind of visual bit of artistry, I think, even though I was just like describing it in a few sentences in the panel description or something like that. But yeah, that back and forth. And again, back when you're writing it, you've got to think about how then you translate that to the artist and the editor. Like, am I making myself clear on this? There's that thing where Landon and his psychiatrist are like talking back and forth, and you have to make sure that the panels are on different sides of the page, right, in the gutters and the alleys, and like one, and then it's staggered, and then back and then forth and back and then forth, so that you can see that who it is and when they're talking. And it sounds like I'm like kind of fanning out on my own thing, but I really like that stuff too. I like to go back and go, oh yeah, that was a pretty good idea. And I do really appreciate that little trick, because, I had that idea 3 years ago. And so like to go back and look at, oh yeah, I did do that, because you don't give yourself, like once it's done, you stop giving yourself credit for anything you did. It's just this whole product. Oh, and that's the other thing, right? That's the other thing. So now, like I read last night, before bed, I read a 1985 issue of Spectacular Spider-Man. Okay. Nice. I think it was like issue 100. Okay. Early appearance of the Spot. And you're just reading it and you're going, oh, not just following the story. You go, oh, like, so the writer had to make this decision at this point. The artist made that choice. And I bet you why they made that choice. And it's just completely opened up like how I read stuff and appreciate stuff now.
Okay. Now how the magic happens, essentially. And it's something you think about now when you're reading comics.
And it's not, and don't get me wrong, it's not that thing like where you work at McDonald's and 6 months in, you can never eat the fries again because you're like, nope, I've seen it. I smell it. It's not that. It's literally enhance my appreciation of comics as a medium, as opposed to like, no, I've seen the way the sausage is made. No thanks.
Huh. Yeah, I got a very general similar feeling when I learn more about like filming process, for example, that now like I every time I see a film now, it's just like the deconstruction that's happening along with it is wonderful. So I'm glad that you get to feel that with comic books, considering how much you're a fan of the medium. What would Landon's favorite like artist or rock band be, could you say, if you had to get? I'm just curious. I read it, and he's a hardcore rock star. What's his vibe? What am I getting out of him in regards to music?
So Landon is probably like, if Landon had made it, or the version of Landon that does make it, right? He's probably the Foo Fighters.
Ooh.
But hang on, but like probably not as cool as Dave Grohl was at his coolest. He's probably still hanging on to some vestiges of 80s hair metal. Okay. And because he's made it so long, it's one of those things where it goes out of fashion and back into fashion without him changing that much. You know, like some kind of vestige of the music industry that is definitely no longer with us because everything's so fragmented. But he probably is. He's probably that, right? Nothing too out there, nothing too experimental. He's got a little bit of that Russell Hammond, almost famous. Like he's got some artistry in him. He's a little bit beyond everybody else, but. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's who he is. I mean, it's definitely only because that's who he is. Definitely not because that's who I
am. Gotcha.
Okay. Gotcha. Yeah. Was that hard for you when you're writing these characters? Do you kind of think of like this whole, because I know a lot of people do this when they're writing screenplay and stuff. You kind of have to think about the entire background of a character when you're writing them. And so is that something you kind of like, you mentioned the Foo Fighters and reference that. Is that something you knew when you were writing him already, or was that not something
I knew he was a fan of that type of rock and roll. I knew he played that kind of rock and roll. I knew he was a big Bowie fan. I know that too. I know he was a modern David Bowie fan for sure. Yeah, to an extent, yes. I mean, some of those tertiary characters though are Landon and Claire are everybody and nobody at the same time, like I mentioned before. But like when you talk about some of my tertiary characters in there, they are much more closely based on like the people who I researched with it, right? Some of them are even named after them, or at least slightly named after them. So I did a little bit less of that than I did on the project that I'm currently working on, which I have like major character bios on everybody. And I know exactly where they were and what they've gone through, whether it's going to be showed in the book or not. So like, I was kind of doing like this, oh God, I'm about to say it again, parallel research as I was putting together the new book. Sorry. Where I was doing the physical research, going to most of the story takes place, or at least the main setting this takes place in this factory in Plymouth, Michigan, in 1946, right after World War II. And it's a real place that my great grandfather apparently worked in. I found some records, and it's one of these factories that got one of the contracts during the war, and it was a wire factory that was then transferred through contracts to a place where they made Marsden mats, which are the long punctured corrugated almost long metal pieces of sheet metal that turned into the temporary runways in Europe and the Pacific. You could build a runway anywhere and launch your bombers and your fighters from. And found that place, literally, check this out, guys, the week before they tore it apart and turned it into like little smaller segmented businesses. Took a tour. I've got my film, I've got my research, I've got all that stuff, and while I was doing that, I'm also kind of creating these characters and finding out who they were 10 years before and who they're going to be and stuff like that. So I've done that, not as much with Parallel, but definitely something I do.
Yeah. Dang, that's. Sorry, you were going to ask something.
I was going to say, I was wondering if you don't mind maybe expanding on other future work. I know you're working on this project. Are there other future works that you're planning on producing in the future, I suppose, or for the future?
So yeah, that's the thing I'm in the middle of right now, because I've got the first issue completely written. That script is done. I've got the character bios. I've got the pitch. I've got all 4 issues plotted out, and the story beats done, and like the research done. So that's kind of what I'm focused on right now. And then like obviously it's still the promotion for Parallel. I've got 2 other projects that are kind of very much on the back burner. In a holding pattern. I really want to get this one off the ground first. And there's something that's kind of a straight up, almost old school horror story that I'm working on with a friend of mine. And then the real passion project that I don't know. I don't have a timetable for this. I don't know if anybody would ever even be interested in it. As far as publishing goes, it'll probably be very much self-published, but all these stories idiocy from my youth, and like the fact that I've never broken a bone, but I've gotten stitches 8 times, 7 of which are in my face. These are all stories that I've told students for the last 20 years and are very well honed. And we're going to probably turn it into like an anthology series of comics for young people, different artists for each story of me doing something very, very stupid. And at the end of it, you're either laughing or you are looking at me saying, why are you still alive? Or why did they let you become a teacher? Like, I don't understand. Is pretty much the overall theme of each of these about 42 stories, actually. so that's kind of like way down the line, but something I definitely want to do someday.
Wow, that'd be huge. I love that. I love that
42
idea.
story anthology. Holy.
We've got a checklist. These are the stories I've been telling the kids. We've been filming them, so we've got them. We could, it's just a matter of getting that going for sure.
Yeah, that will be a beast to tackle. That's crazy. Oh, well, I mean, I think that's all the questions I had about Parallel. Did you have any other questions,
No,
Gino?
I think I was satisfied.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much again, Jason. Is that where can they find Parallel?
So yeah, it's actually really, really easy to get. I mean, this is the magic of the 21st century, right? You can be archaic and old school like me and literally walk into your local comic shop if it's safe to do so. If you go up to the cashier and say, get me the Jason Douglas book, they're going to say, what? If you say, get me Parallel, you're going to say, huh? And even maybe, as much as I love SourcePoint and as big as SourcePoint has gotten, they might not even know what that is. So diamond order code still works. You walk up there, and if they want your business and you tell them this diamond order code, which is FEB 20 1983, easy to remember because that's the year that that Return of the Jedi came out. So FEB 20 1983, they'll order it for you. Okay. If they don't want your business for whatever reason, again, 21st century, super easy. SourcePointPress.com. You can get the hard copy there for $7. They'll ship it to you anywhere in the world. They also have the digital copy, right? I think that's only $3. You can get that. There were variants made. Talk about nerding out. Okay, one of those variants is still available. Okay, the other 2 are sold out. But there's a direct link. It's an CO exclusive that I've got a direct link on my Instagram page. So at J Douglas Writes, come and see me. Give me a follow. Check out the art. Check out the covers. And if you want that variant, that's there. And then I'm kind of running a special on my Instagram account right now. If you are interested, you come over, drop me a DM, and I will send you anywhere in the US a signed copy of Parallel for only $10. So that's a $7 book. Get the signature, and I will include US shipping on to anywhere you are, US shipping. So it's really easy to get. And like I said, support indie comics, support an indie artist, support me because I'm a maniac and really want to do well because I really want my second book published because now that the dreams come true, I want it to keep going. Support small press publishing, support your LCS, right? Like I said, you buy indie comics and those dollars go a whole lot further. So, last thing, again, come and see me on my Instagram, J Douglas Writes, right? And here's the thing, like this is my favorite thing because I've learned in the same way that I learned to become a decent teacher by watching teachers that were good and watching teachers that are bad, right? Who am I going to be? Who am I not going to be? My con-going years, I met a lot of great artists, a lot of great writers. I met a lot that were kind and generous and really giving with their time, and others that weren't so much. And I very much resolved myself to be one and not the other. So you come over and you've got questions about Parallel, you've got any kind of question, you drop me a DM and I'm going to talk your ear off. I will never big time you. Way too many times. What happens is, somebody's like, because, when you put something out in the world and somebody else likes it, right? Mm-hmm. When you become a fan of something and then you meet the person on any level that made that thing that you're a fan of, you automatically, deserve it or no, give them a certain amount of reverence and a certain amount of respect. And you're like, it's really kind of baffling to me when somebody sends me, that DM that says like, oh, I know you're really busy, but I just had to really question if you've got time. And then what happens is I end up talking way too long and answering their questions so fully that 9 times out of 10, the person who I'm talking to is like, yeah, listen, so I gotta go. Thanks for your time, but I really didn't expect you to go an hour. I gotta go, but thanks. So yeah, you got questions. I've got the time for you. Come and hang out with me, and I'll answer your questions. We'll get you a copy of Parallel, and we'll talk about it.
We'll also be tagging you on our Instagram along with
cool. We'll be putting all this information out there as well.
If anybody missed comes out, the for his Instagram, we'll also be tagging you, Jason, so you can come through our channel as well.
Cool.
It's been great talking to you, though.
Seriously, Jason, thank you so much. This was really fun to do. You're an awesome guy, and you gave us a little bit more insight when it came into comic book writing, which we really appreciate. I'm sure our fans do too. So thank you so much again.
So, gentlemen, it was my pleasure. Thank you so much. It was a lot of fun.
That's Jason Douglas. I'm Gino, your resident weeb.
I'm Nikita, your comic authority. And
this is your resident nerds.
We're out. Thank you guys.